Hello and welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast, connecting people and systems. We talk to brilliant minds from education, manufacturing, public service, and beyond, exploring the dynamic interplay between people and the systems that drive their success. Discover how you can connect more dots in your own life and work. Welcome, Luke.
Hi, Sam.
You all right? Tell me, as we started, what has excited you this week?
Thank you, Sam. I listened to an interview of Douglas Adams, the guy who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy,
Yeah.
and it was like he was explaining his thinking process, and he was saying like most people look at a light switch and just think it turns the light on, it turns the light off, but I think about the wires that connect the light switch to my house to the power station, and it was just like his brain just like it goes further and further as he's thinking. So it was just fascinating, like he just starts with something small and just keeps on building out and out and out on it. So like this is why you ended up with things like the Babel fish kind of. It's just fascinating to hear that way of thinking.
Okay. As always, Luke has something highly intellectual and me less so. What has excited me this week is a decision that I'm not going to have massive goals for myself for the next 6 months. That's what's excited me. I've got a little puppy and I just want to be in my little world with my puppy, if that makes sense. And I'm not going to have massive goals. I feel I just need to be for 6 months.
Mhm.
And one of that is my daughter's moving out. She moved back in and she's moving out. So the first time in 21 years, my husband and I will have the house to ourselves. So I'm just going to exist. And that is super exciting me this week with my new puppy. So there you go. We are the contrast, as always. I'd like to welcome our guest today, the fabulous Ida Doyer, who Luke introduced to me. And Luke is a sensory integration occupational therapist. And she has worked in the. Did I say Luke is this, or did I
You
say
did.
I
I was
did?
thinking that was quite a bold
Said it.
statement, Sam,
I
to be
mean, hang
honest.
on, let me start. So we've got the fabulous Ida is a passionate sensory integration occupational therapist. She's worked in the clinical and consulting fields of sensory integration for over 25 years, and a daily sense of awe was established in her around the powerful organizing effect sensation has on her nervous system, and her interest in corporate health and wellness saw her obtaining a master's degree in industrial psychology. And Ida also does a sensory workplace assessment profile, which she has done on us, and really interesting. And I'm sure we're both going to refer to that today. And Ida is in South Africa, currently, I think, in a big city. Are you at the moment, Ida?
Yes,
But
Johannesburg.
Johannesburg, yeah, that's quite a big city. But you grew up in a very rural, small town. So you've gone from sort of one extreme to the other. So welcome, Ida. Thank you for joining us on our podcast.
Thank you so much, Sams. Thank you so much, Luke, for having me. I'm so excited to be with you today.
So tell us about your sensory work style assessment and also linking it perhaps into your master's degree. How did you get into what you're doing now?
Sam, becoming a AIRS sensory integration specialist, AIRS stands for AYRES, Jean Ayres. She was the mother and the founder of ASI, AIRS Sensory Integration. Um, To be able to specialize as a sensory integration specialist, you need to first study occupational therapy, which I loved. It
And
was such
can
a
you tell us
challenge.
what occupational therapy means? Because I hear it a lot, but I'm not sure everybody knows what it actually is.
Yes, that's a brilliant question. I think most people don't know. And occupational therapists only find out once they start studying, me included. I love to translate it into simply activity therapy. And occupational therapy has an incredible philosophy. It partners with the client, it partners with the patient, it joins hands in goal directed treatment. And it's really about choosing that meaningful activity, that just right activity for the client so that they enjoy and embrace their own therapeutic process. So it's really, I think, one of the most incredible careers on earth. And it's really, really wide. You can literally do physical OTs, psych OT, return to work, spinal cord injuries, pediatric OT, mental health and wellness, etc. So it's quite a vast application to the occupational therapy world. But following your 4 years of occupational therapy, you can then specialize in sensory integration. And side note, sensory integration is terribly tough. It's wonderful. I love it. Sensory science is my life. I don't only work it, but I live it and practice it as well. That sensory integration is quite tough because the brain, the nervous system, the sensory system is so tricky, so complex. There's neuroplasticity, and a visual high seeking score for one individual might play very differently out in another individual. So there's a lot of complexity in the nervous system, in the sensory system, as we all know. But I loved studying sensory integration. I started working in the clinical field of sensory integration, and traditionally it is applied in the pediatric field and in the mental health and wellness fields. But really, we all have a sensory system. We all have senses. We all have eyes, ears, nose, mouth, touch, and movement. But our sensory threshold scores are so different.
So
And that's
elaborate on that when you say like a high seeking or a low seeking, because that's what I found really interesting. What you mean by that?
all right. So Sam, when you look at your senses and you look at your sensory receptors at a neuroanatomical level, there's a threshold. So at that level of neuroanatomical threshold, how quickly and intensely are the sensory messages relayed from the one neuron to the next, to the next, to the next, into the sensory cortex of the brain to register and orientate to and respond to these sensory messages. Now, it sounds quite complex, but basically what it means is we all have different sensory threshold scores. Some of us have high sensory thresholds, which might make us a bit sensory seeking. And that simply means we can take a lot of sensory stimulation for a longer period of time at a higher frequency before we register and respond. Some of us have low sensory threshold scores where it only takes a little bit of stimulation for a short period of time before we register and almost over respond. And we can see a fluctuation of these over responsivities or under responsivities in all 7 of our sensory systems: visual, auditory, touch, smell, taste, and movement. And we actually have 2 movement systems: changes in head position and head movement, and changes in body position and body movement. So it's incredibly interesting how our sensory thresholds actually directly impact emotional regulation or dysregulation, our behavior patterns and habits and preferences and choices, our ability to learn and focus and concentrate, our preference in terms of environment, best fit environment, study space and workspace, and also our social preferences. Some of us, like myself, I'm an extroverted, sensory sensitive, so that makes for quite an interesting combo. But it certainly has an impact on whether we prefer large circles and groups of people or smaller, more intimate, how well we tolerate group sports versus individual sport, etc.
And you did mine, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating, and that I was very distracted by sound. And since you did mine, literally, if I want to concentrate something, I wear earplugs, and it's just wonderful. But then you kind of like I find boring food bland and boring, and I seek out quite high tasting food, strong tasting, not necessarily spicy, but strong. And just the whole profile you did. Luke, can you remember what you came across as in your profile?
Well, it kind of confirmed several things that I kind of knew. And so I was like, Ida, this is very interesting. But one of the big ones is I'm like super visual. So again, when we were talking about the sensory profile, like if you're going to give me information, give it to me in a diagram and I'll get it almost instantly. But if there's a lot of text, I'm like, you're asking my brain to work. It doesn't, what is that a low sensory tolerance there, Ida? Something like that.
Yeah.
So like I know how I process information kind of thing, but also I am quite, as you said, quite sensitive to sound. So I can only take so much sound before my brain goes, I've had enough as well. So those things are like in terms of how you then think about where you work, where you interact with people, and particularly in schools, I was thinking about Ida.
Yeah.
Um, to what extent do schools actually hinder young people's ability to work if you're in a really noisy classroom? And actually, what you need is a low sound environment to be able to work at your best. Like the assumption is, or vice versa, actually. Sometimes people do like quite like a bit of chatting because they can also process while they're hearing other noises go. It just seems to me like we don't think enough about our senses. And this is what you're really highlighting here, Ida. So yeah, I think there's probably about four questions in there, which is like, what does it mean for me? What does it mean for working together? What does it mean for education? And why aren't we thinking enough about our senses?
Oh, look, let's take one day at a time. Look, I think the reason why we're not thinking too much about our senses is because there's such a misconception around the senses. We think sensory science is fluffy, it's all about pink crystals and hot baths and massages. And it's such a punchy, powerful, tiniest, relevant science. I actually don't know how people exist without this knowledge about themselves.
Hmm.
So, really, I think the reason for the poor awareness is going back to how we qualify occupational therapy and going into air sensory integration has made it quite exclusive. And traditionally, most occupational therapists would work in the therapeutic field of pediatric and mental health and wellness. And actually, because we all have differences in how we are wired from a sensory perspective, we all need this information. We need this from the age of 13 to 103. We can benefit from it to regulate emotions, to look at our behavior, to optimize performance, to choose best fit environments, and to manage our relationships. So, really, I think it's also another aspect to it is because it's part of our unconscious, uncontrolled, intuitive, knee-jerk reactions. So it's there. It absolutely controls us in a powerful way, but it's not a conscious awareness. We might know that we love a hot water bottle or a beautiful glass of wine or diagrams and not too much detail. We might know these things about ourselves intuitively, but it is absolutely life-changing to see the entire sensory spectrum score to your sensory work style as an adult or to your student sensory style as a student, and to know how to manage yourself.
Mm.
So really, if we look at visual and auditory, the two information systems, it tells us, like you and Sam discovered doing your sensory work style assessment profile, it tells us how we process information, which is vital. Do I see what I need to see? And do I hear what I need to hear while at work? If I have a low sensitive visual and auditory, for example, you and Sam, you hear what you need to hear immediately, intensely, you over respond to it, and you can't stop hearing. So it's almost contributes to your levels of stress and distractibility. But were you a student in a classroom, I'm sure you would have learned incredibly quickly just listening to your professors. So there's a good and a bad, there's a flip side to each one of those sensory scores of ours. So visual and auditory, the information systems, how do I process and how do I improve the processing of my information that I see and that I read? Second, touch, smell, and taste are social senses, relationship senses. How do I react in a group? How do I react in a classroom? I'm quite tactile sensitive, so I always sat right at the back of a lecture hall, right towards the end, closest to the exit, where no one could bump against me, and I was terribly grumpy should a student ask me to push in. I still can't sit. I have to sit in the aisle seat in an airplane, for example, just to have a little more space on a touch level. So touch, smell, and taste, it impacts how do we feel when there's a group project? How do we feel when there's an offsite? How do we feel when we have to attend webinars or what seminars, etc.? And then the movement system tells us what sort of movement, how often, what type of movement is needed to stay activated, on task, and able to perform. The movement system is incredibly important. It connects with our brain's motivation button, the reticular activating system. And it directly controls our levels of alertness, our wake and sleep patterns, and therefore productivity, performance, output, work speed. And we all have different movement preferences and different movement needs. So yeah, Luke, if you look at a classroom, I mean, it is archaic to teach and treat and assess a classroom, all students in the exact same way. And sometimes, I'm not saying poor, overwhelmed teachers must accommodate each and every individual. But if you think about the generic sensory strategies of giving a student a hot cup of tea and a weighted blanket or even a weighted clipboard. There's research done on when we interview candidates and you have a hot cup of tea in your hand and you have a weighted clipboard on which you make your notes. You perceive that candidate so much more positively. And the sensory science behind that is the touch input, the neutral warmth, the weight, the proprioception. It makes us feel regulated, calm, organized, able to perform. So should a student just have a warm cup of tea and a weighted pen and a weighted, I don't know, weighted teddy in their laps while doing their oral exam, you will make an enormous difference in that student's life. So, yeah.
I think that's interesting because I was thinking there would be teachers going, listen, you're just taking the mick now. I can't be doing 30 swap, so, sensory styles in this lesson. But I presume some of it is as well is if I am aware of environments that I will find overwhelming on one of my senses, I can then come up with strategies and tools to manage that and also to potentially recover afterwards, sort of thing. Be aware of so it's not about avoiding things, but being aware of it to take proactive and reactive action, I presume.
That's it. That's it. We can't change our sensory thresholds, but we can practice sensory strategies and small environmental adaptations like you do, Sam, with your earphones or your earplugs, which is a lifesaver. So it's really about awareness. It's about anticipation. It's about the creation of strategies, the implementation of small environmental adaptations, and then lastly, my re-regulation. If I'm a sensory sensitive, married to a sensory seeker with three sensory seeking stepsons, bonus sons. So it can get overwhelming, especially when we're on holiday. But if I know that relationships are forever, but sensory overload and sensory overwhelm is temporary, I can prepare myself, I can buffer myself, I can take my shower and have my hot drink and have my chewing gum and be dressed as comfortably as possible and listen to my song en route. I can join them. I don't have to bungee jump, but I can walk with them across the swing bridge and take the photos. And then I know exactly afterwards, right, I'm not going to go to the beach with all of them now. I'm going to need a garden restaurant and a glass of wine and then straight home. So what happens before? What happens after to re-regulate, to really preserve your relationships mindfully and to not start avoiding, like you say, avoiding noisy, overloading, large gatherings. What I did as a student, I'm visual, auditory, and touch sensitive. What I did as a student to not miss out on social gatherings was I danced. So I used my movement system, which is a regulator, to actually stay sane, regulated and activated, not trying to shout in the corner, to be able to hear my friends screaming into my ear, blocking their ears and screaming, blocking my ear and trying to hear, what that's like. So I just said, I'm gonna join in, but you'll find me on the dance floor. I'm not going to be having a conversation in a nightclub. And I also knew when I got home, I needed a hot bath, I needed a cup of tea, and I needed to go straight to bed with my book. I couldn't do an after party. I could only do the party, which is good enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Luke, you wanted to ask some questions around trauma and neurodivergence.
I did indeed, Sam. So I think, Ida, there's a question in my mind, which is how does sensory, and I take your point particularly about sensory overload, which you just mentioned, to what extent does trauma affect your sensory, um, what did you say earlier, inputs? So does it shut them down or does it make you even more sensitive to them?
Right. So, look, the sensory brain, Luke, is the brain where fight, flight, freeze or fight, flight, stress and a trauma response happens. So it sits at sensory brain level. That is where overreactivity, overresponsivity sits. If we take that into account, the sensitive scores that you have may feel to you more sensitive during periods of trauma because you're already under stress, you're already not sleeping well, you're already feeling a bit frazzled. So the scores are what they are. You'll just reach that threshold so much sooner. So you'll feel more insensory overload and overwhelm because your whole nervous system is already in a sensory brain fight, flight, stress response. What I love about sensory science and sensory awareness and self-management is it's such a powerful stress management approach, because if you know what regulates you and if you know what triggers you, you can use the bottom-up sensory approach to quickly self-calm. Because in times of trauma, in times of stress, we all know the cognitive brain, the top brain structures have been hijacked anyway, and you can't think yourself calm. And this is where sensory rituals, sensory discipline, let me do 5 things to save my life, sort of thing, every single day, come hell or high water. That's where the benefit of bottom-up regulation happens. And just for a personal perspective, 2014, it's a good couple of years ago, I went through trauma like all of us on God's good earth go through. There are times when we go through terrible difficulty. And I needed to stay resilient. I needed to stay strong. I needed to stay alive. I needed to buffer a whole lot of stress. And what I started doing were only 5 things, and they were all sensory. And I did them religiously with discipline. I'm still doing them to this day. And the first thing was movement, because the movement is our regulation sense. I get up in the morning, I train for the stress to come. My husband, sensory seeker, gets up in the morning, he trains to wake up properly, to activate. So to this day, I train in the morning to almost buffer the stress of whatever will be coming my way that day. I needed to move, and I needed to move religiously, and I will never stop. Bob Iger is the CEO of Disney, always says he trains for health, sanity, and vanity. I certainly train for sanity exclusively. So I started training. Secondly, I started watching what I watched. I had to become the gatekeeper. I had to become the guardian. I had to become the wise old person at the gate of my eyes and my ears. And this is so needed today more than ever with virtual realities, digital overload, virtual fatigue. And I really started filtering with discipline what I allowed in through my eyes. And I'm not as strict any longer, but I'm trying to keep that discipline in place in my life. Thirdly, I started gardening. So I am tactile sensitive, but I love getting some soil on my fingers. I'm a brilliant weeder. So weeding is perfect because I create visual order and visual calm. I get the tactile input. I get the microbes, which releases emotional regulatory compounds. And then you can't just pluck a weed. You have to grade your movement. There's proprioception involved. There's a bit of intent behind weeding. So that's like one of my best activities between sessions and consults still to this day. I also started listening to music with meaning. So this is a whole brain stress management during times of trauma and trouble to really give yourself the bottom up, calming, regulating auditory input, which changes levels of regulation immediately and powerfully. But to combine the message, the beauty, the upliftment, the meaning, cognitively is really a whole brain stress buster, which I still to this day use almost daily. And then lastly, I invested in a couple of tactile props, weighted blankets, fluffy blankets, an electric blanket, hot water bottles, um, a very specific weighted TV blanket, which just soothes and calms our overloaded stress tactile system. Neutral weight, neutral warmth, weight, firm touch, and deep pressure are absolutely regulating and very, very powerful. So those, I mean, look, I believe in sensory science because I lived these trauma strategies for myself. And of course, there are cognitive behavioral, and of course, there are the filtering of your thoughts. And of course, you have to go for counseling and your psychologist and your psychiatrist and do everything else right. But had I not done these 5 sensory practices, which also gave structure and routine to a day filled with trauma and pain, I would have been very lost. So, yeah, I'm quite excited about the sensory scientific emotional regulation component for sure.
I think that's really interesting. And I think it's, what, like what you said, being aware and being purposeful in your actions, so that, with the trauma and the hypervigilant, I certainly know that I had a big traumatic thing a while ago. And even now, I can't watch anything that's too violent because it distresses me, because I remember the vulnerability and the pain of the physical trauma that I had. And so I am very aware of, I won't watch it. I won't. It's better now. I couldn't even watch DIY SOS immediately afterwards because it distressed me. But now I'm better. But there are films I will not watch because I know, and it is being that sort of purposeful, isn't it? And but I find that really interesting what you've said about being purposeful on a daily basis. I don't think I am enough, actually, and that's something I need to think about more.
Bear
Yeah.
in mind, you're not going to set any goals for yourself, Sam.
No, I'm not going to set any goals, but listen, hot cup of tea in bed with a blanket I feel is something I can work towards. I feel that's, I'm there. I'm ready there.
That's within
Yeah,
you.
it is a massive goal for you. Your tactile score is neutral towards high and
Okay.
happy. And then you're also, yeah, look, puppy will give you a lot of movement.
I've
You're
got a
going to
new
be,
puppy, everybody. That's why it's not a nickname for my husband or anything. I have got a new puppy called Betsy, so that's why Ida is referring to that.
sorry. So puppy will give you a lot of movement,
Yeah.
a lot of garden breaks. If you're not going to be diligent, your house is going to stink and you'll smell sensitive. So that's a huge motivator for you
Mm,
to
mm,
get puppy outside, to get puppy on your lap, to cuddle. That's a huge, massive goal.
yeah.
And look, the fluctuations and the higher versus the lower scores, generally, your more sensitive scores are the sensory systems you need to rest and regulate and give a break.
Mm,
And the visual system, your medium visual, but probably medium towards sensitive, really, where what you see, and then it was exacerbated by the trauma. So being the watchdog of our visual systems is actually a responsibility we all have to take
mm,
seriously because there's just too much out there that's disorganizing and dysregulating and unhelpful
mm,
and harmful. And why do that to yourself? So really your low sensitive scores, less is more, or regulating input. Remember, in each of our sensory systems, there are either activating, alerting input
mm,
or calming and regulating input. If you think about movement, if you jump on a trampoline, you can really hype yourself up. But if you rock a baby to sleep gently, you're also using movement, but it's a calming, inhibiting input. So for your sensitive sensory scores, look out for them, give it a break, be diligent and deliberate daily, but also provide it with a calming and inhibiting, regulating input it deserves and craves.
mm.
And your high scores, like movement and work style and touch, your high scores, puppy's perfect. Go
Great.
outside, spend time with puppy, have a weighted blanket, have your tea, gardening, cooking, baking, arts and crafts, training, definitely. Swimming
Wonderful.
for high touch and high movement. A swim is brilliant.
I'm going swimming Thursday. There you go.
Oh,
I love swimming. So that's perfect. I'm going to start doing it more regularly. So I
yeah.
know and that's wonderful, and I love that. And I've just had a realization myself now that I could be incredibly productive on a day and sit at my desk for 12 hours and get so much done. But the next day I'm like, no, I can't be bothered to do anything. And that's because I'm not regulating and taking the breaks and the movement. Look at that. Ding dong. There's a big moment. Now, I
Look
know, Luke,
forward.
thank you for that. And this has been so exciting. And I know you're bringing this to the UK, and I'm super excited for that. Luke, you're going to be itching to link this into systems now, aren't you? Because that's your thing.
Always, Sam. Thank you for that. So I think there's a question in there for me, Ida, which is to what extent, if we say that like organizations, communities are forms of systems, to what extent do those systems recognize and appreciate these types of sensory needs? I'm actually thinking about like the most boring meetings I've sat in where you are sensory unstimulated, but everyone has sat there for like 3 to 4 hours. And like if there was a way to change the system of meetings, if we just start with that one, like what would be your ideal meeting to meet sensory needs, Ida?
What I would do in meetings is for sure to, wherever possible, rather have a walking meeting as opposed to a stuffy boardroom meeting. You are incorporating movement, it's regulating and activating. For the little one who's a bit stressed, it's calming. For the one that's half asleep, it wakes them up. You get outside in the sunshine. There isn't a whole lot of threatening eye contact. Sometimes eye contact can be a bit threatening to the visual sensitive to maintain that eye contact. Whereas if there's a repetitive motor action of the both of you walking in the same direction, there's rhythm, there's fresh air, there's vitamin D, you're off a screen, which immediately stops that overload from that perspective. It could present a really successful meeting. And if there are garden spaces or a garden walk available, that would be my best.
What if
If
it's
it's
like a
not,
large meeting, Ida,
oh,
with kind of, I'm sure you were going to get to that, so I'll shut up now.
so no, there's a large meeting. I would definitely urge all delegates to not sit and play on their phones. I would also urge them to not, if they wanted to take down notes, to rather take down pen to paper, 1983 type notes, where you get that regulating, repetitive touch, movement, flowy processing and slowing down of what you are listening to and seeing. It actually gives your brain the opportunity to properly process what you're dealing with. I would have blasts of music playing intermittently to sort of wake up the ones that have fallen asleep. But classical music, energizing classical music, so it's for the sensitives and the seekers. I would definitely have a nice therapy or a stress ball or a fidget toy available for them to fidget with, or then the note making, or just blow bubbles into the audience. That's often a lifter of moods and regulation. If they pop up into a squat, if possible, it actually improves learning and concentration by 11%, between 9 and 11%. There was a Swedish study talking about intermittent movement. For every 20 minutes sitting passively, you need to stretch or move or do something for 1 minute, the 20/1 approach. There we go. Or the
For
chair,
those just listening, not watching the video, Luke had just stood up and kind of did a bit of a stretch there.
That is so powerful. Movement is brilliant. Music is brilliant. Oh, and then if we can incorporate smell and taste, the smells that are alerting to just activate your audience again are usually the clean type smells like your eucalyptus, mint, rosemary increases learning by 75% in a new study. Lemongrass, citrus, those sort of clean smells. And then if you have a stressed audience and you can see they can't calm down, you can give them the lavenders, the ylang ylang, nerolies, etc. I would definitely give delegates also something crunchy and something chewy to eat, because remember that provides a mini movement through the jaw joint, which is proprioception, which is our regulator. And if you give them something sour, bitter, spicy, and icy, it immediately lifts activation as well.
Do you know,
Dark chocolate.
some of this I absolutely love, but some of this I'll be meetings and they'll be like, what the hell are you doing here, Garner? What is this you're bringing out? What is this?
You know what's interesting, Sam? I love working with people and seeing how they connect the science to the self. So I love doing these multi-sensory workshops, action-based, so that they can connect with the deep science from Gene is the beginning of the 60s in California, but they can also connect with their own sensory systems, and they can feel what activates and what regulates them, and sort of feel that change in alertness. As soon as we play a game of table tennis with my students, my high school students, the yawning stops, the smiles are back, the energy levels back, the blush in the cheeks. It's beautiful to see a 5-minute game of table tennis. and what it does to their own levels of activation. And then I ask them, how do you feel now compared to if you take a study break on your phone, lovey dove? Do you feel the same? Do you
Mm.
also feel flat and lethargic and depressed and anxious? Or do you actually feel, I can take in a little bit more of what Ida is saying right now?
Yeah, it is. I've been thinking a lot since I've met you and had it done, and how can we transfer that into the systems and the workplace and the education? And what about laughter? Because I always think that laughter is quite, obviously I'm hilarious. So, I always think that laughter is a great tool as well for helping people sort of almost deregulate, if that's a word.
Re-regulate.
Re-regulate, thank you.
Sam, you are spot on. I always talk about the 8 M's to regulate. And one of those M's is for humming. So it's a hum or a sing or a belly laugh, creating a sound through your own vocal cords. So laughing out loud ties in with triggering the vagus nerve, which triggers the parasympathetic nervous system for rest, digest, and relaxation.
Mm.
And also, laughter, one would only laugh if you feel safe and if you feel loved most of the time, right? So it already sets the tone to I'm safe at a crocodile sensory brain level. I'm loved and accepted at emotional limbic brain level. So let me access my prefrontal cortex, pay attention, learn, remember, and be present. So it's powerful to create the safe and the loving spaces in school. Otherwise, that brain is in fight, flight, freeze. There's absolutely zero learning happening. They may as well just go out and play a game of paddle.
We do. We need to have more fun, I think, in education and the workplace. Luke, do you want to ask one last question before we sort of move on to sort of wrapping up?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a question in my mind, Ida, which is around sensory needs and neurodiversity. And so, for example, I'm dyslexic and dyspraxic. So I know, that my brain works in a certain way. It's taken me many years to figure this out. Um, and so, having done the sensory assessment, it kind of reinforced things that I knew I needed. And I'm much more confident to ask for as well because of that. But I think often there's the neuro assessment, but then there isn't the sensory assessment that goes alongside it sometimes. And I think there's a question in my mind is like, how do you help people recognize that if you are neurodiverse, you are going to have a range of sensory needs? And how do you identify those needs based off of all the things you're saying? So one of the things that I was told was lots of people with dyslexia take up martial arts or they do martial arts because there's the movement element in there. Like this, I was talking to the woman who diagnosed me, and she said, "Oh, do you do martial arts?" I was like, "Oh, I did it years ago." She said, "Like, I just knew, like, if you're dyslexic, you're likely to have done a movement activity straight away." So, like, there are these, I think, these strong correlations between the sensory and neurodiverse. Am I just making stuff up, or do you agree in any way?
Not at all, Luke. No, there's a huge overlap. It almost feels to me, from what I've learned at university as a sensory integration specialist, that it's the most common diagnosis to overlap with the most other neurodiverse diagnoses. Sensory processing is almost always thrown in there with ADD, ADHD, ASD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, etc., anxiety, whatever the case may be. Sensory processing disorder, SPD, is almost always present. And once you do that assessment and you just empower and assist and really give the student and adults the the tools to get to that level of optimal activation. Whatever the other diagnosis might be, things are just going to be so much smoother and so much easier. If your sensory needs and your sensory brain is regulated, at least you can activate calm emotions, which we know often in neurodivergence, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of stress. So if you know how to regulate, take care of your sensory needs, at least you can access a level of calm emotions, you can access an alert mind. And it also, what I like about it, to Sam's point of having more fun, bringing in more multisensory experiences, more laughter, it's almost a recipe of what to do. It's not terribly threatening to say to someone, you need to jump on a trampoline into the pool, have something crunchy and chewy to eat, and then only can you start your day. It's not it's not something too weird. It's not hard to come by. It's not expensive. It's not difficult to implement. So yes, every single individual in the world, whether they're neurodivergent or not, are actually sensory neurodiverse. There are as many sensory styles as there are stars in the sky and fingerprints on God's earth. So the empowerment and the light and the self-acceptance and the self-management, it takes a big weight off of other diagnoses, which makes life hard enough.
Thank you, Ida. What I have benefited personally from knowing you, I have to say, and I'm very grateful for that. I know you are looking to bring more of this into the UK, and I think it's going to be absolutely massive, particularly for a lot of students and adults, but also neurodivergence students as well. So I'm super excited for that, and also for teaching staff as well. I think it would be really interesting to know for themselves. Um, Luke, what's your biggest takeaway from today?
I'm still going to stick with systems, Sam, I
Oh, of
have to
course
say.
you are. I mean, of course.
But I think there's something in there which is around how systems are failing to adapt to the knowledge of sensory needs.
Mm.
And if we want to have workforces, students, higher engagement, we need to recognize that the senses have to be met. We are not just brains in bodies. And I think that's what's really compelling in what Ida said today.
And mine is people, obviously, is that I think having metacognition and, a better understanding of your systems in yourself, I think can be absolutely revolutionary for a lot of people. Ida, what would you like people to take away from today, their biggest one sort of takeaway from this?
I would love people to acknowledge that sensory science is a really crucial, really important, really life-saving tool
Mhm.
to manage emotions, to change your behavior, and to optimize your performance, your learning, and your output. It's really, to me, it feels as if it's such an archaic system, Luke. It's archaic, right? It's as old as us walking to school and swimming in rivers and riding horses. But to me, this is innovative. What is truly, truly innovative? What can save one's life right now in terms of holistic well-being, physical, mental, social, spiritual, as well as optimizing your performance, your learning, your behavior, etc. It's innovative also to reach people and to reach students on the platform, digital platform, augmented intelligence, which could potentially dysregulate them, which could potentially steal them, which could potentially really impact their marks and their well-being negatively, to use that platform to reach them,
Mm.
to teach them, to help
Mm.
them self-manage, to help them take a break when they are in visual overload, to help them recognize, I have a visual seeking score. I'm vulnerable to spending too much time online. I'm not doing anything wrong. That's part of my sensory wiring. I just need to be aware, and maybe I need a phone that kicks me off after an hour. That's true innovation, to reach them, teach them, empower them, and change lives, combining augmented intelligence with the human aspect. And the opportunities now, the opportunity is, um, yeah, the time is quite
Time
is
is
quite
now. Yeah, I'm very
now.
excited.
It's crucial. We
Yeah,
need we need this intervention, and it is a soft, kind, powerful
yeah.
approach.
So, what would you like to promote to people, Ida? I mean, we've all done a pretty good selling job of your swap system, I feel, and I will put a link to your website along with the podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to promote before I ask you one final question?
I would love to promote the Century Student Style, the Succeed, which will be on this augmented intelligence platform on Crunchy ID, together with a personality assessment, which is very interesting and exciting because disciplining and knowing your sensory brain makes it possible for you to achieve
Mm.
what you've scored on at personality or aptitude level. And yes, that's for students sort of age 13 to 25 while studying, while doing their honors, while entering their first year of high school. And of course, there'll be a huge support element to teaching staff as well, because a regulated teacher is a good teacher, an influential and a powerful teacher. And they are overworked and they are dysregulated and they are overwhelmed. And we need to look after them and support them as well.
Thank you, Ida. One final question, bit of a random one we ask all our guests. You've got a time machine. You can travel back in history to witness one event, but you can't change it or get involved. You can only witness it. What event would you like to go back and see?
Sam, oh my goodness. Let me think about that for a minute. It would be the construction and building of one of these old, beautiful, impressive, massive cathedrals. Probably the
Okay.
Notre Dame. Might even be the Sistine Chapel and the painting of the ceiling and what was going on there and the chats and the back and forth. That I'm sure that would have been quite interesting.
Thank you, Ida. It's been absolutely brilliant, as I say, and thank you. That's all I can say. Thank you to everybody, the millions of you that are listening. As always, please subscribe if you liked it, and if you didn't like it, listen again because clearly you're wrong. Luke, thank you very much for joining me again and being my partner on our quest to change the world. And goodbye from all of us, and take care of yourself. Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.